Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about skin and how to add some really powerful details to your skin in order to start getting it to look realistic. We're going to talk about how to use a multi-res modifier, how to use color in an effective way. We're going to talk about subsurface scattering, what it is and how to use it. And then we're going to talk about adding a little bit more detail on top of all of those in order, again, to get a really cool skin texture. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is baking normal maps. So we have this untextured head right now, and you can see it's modeled pretty well, but it's still pretty plain. So we're going to add some detail with the multi-res modifier and then bake that detail into the low resolution model. And so to start out, I'm just going to come over to my modifiers tab, click add modifier and search for multi-res. What the multi-resolution modifier does is it allows you to add subdivisions to your model, but it allows you to go back and forth with how many subdivisions you actually have. So I'm going to subdivide this 4 times just so I have plenty to work with. So I'm going to sculpt some detail in here. I'm going to come over to the sculpting tab. I'm going to start with a draw brush, and I'm going to start by adding a couple of bags under the eye. So I'm just going to make this guy look pretty tired here. Then from here, I'm going to add just some pores to the surface of my face. So I have Blender Kit installed, which is super useful. But if you don't have Blender Kit, you can find alphas on like the ZBrush website and use those to sculpt. But I'm going to just look for pores maybe. Let's use this guy. I'm just adding surface detail that would be really hard to get any other way. I'm going to add maybe a scar. Let's look for a good juicy scar. Okay, I like that. Nice scar there. And with all this detail added, I think I'm ready to bake the normal map. So again, what baking a normal map does is it takes all the detail we added with our high resolution mesh, and then it bakes it onto the lower resolution mesh. So if we take a look at this geometry, it is so dense, and if you were to try and animate on this, it'd be a mess, right? And so we're going to essentially bake all this detail onto this mesh here so it's a lot more manageable. So in order to do that, we're going to come over to the shading tab. We're going to bring in an image texture and then click new. I'll just name it normal map. I'll make the normal map pretty high resolution, click new image. And what's really important is if we come over to color space, I'm going to change this to non-color. Okay, so I have my model selected and I have my image selected down here. And so now I'm going to come over to my modifier tab and I'm going to bring the levels viewport down as low as it can go. And then I'll come back up to my render view, come over to the bake, and if I select bake, you see we have that normal map baked onto this image. So now we could even just delete this multi-res, and let's come over to material preview. If we add a normal map node, plug the normal map into the normal map node, and then the normal map node into normal, you can see we have all of that detail in our model, but the resolution is really manageable. So that's the first thing we can do to start adding extra detail to make our character model believable. You see we even have all this pore information in here. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how to add color effectively in order to add some more realism to your model. Basically how I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a base color and I'm going to stack image textures on top of that until we get something that we want. So I'll add an image texture and I'll plug that into Principled BSDF. I'll create a new one. I'll call this base skin. I'm just going to choose a skin color to add to this color section, and then I'll click new image, and now I have this base color all over my image. Now no skin is this uniform in color, so we're going to stack some more effects on top of it in order to get it again more realistic. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a mix color node in between the base skin color and the Principled BSDF, and then I'm going to add a new image texture, and this is going to be the extra colors and variation that I'm adding to this texture. So I'm going to add a new image texture and I'll plug that into the B slot. Nothing happens really because I don't have an image here, but I'll create new and I'll add this and I'll name this skin variation. Now what's really important here is under color, I'm going to turn down all of these settings, especially alpha. And this will give us a completely blank slate to work with. And so I'll click New Image, and now we can paint these textures onto our model. So what's also important is to have our skin variation node set to slot A and our base skin node set to slot B. And so I'll select my skin variation node, and I'll come up to texture paint, and we'll start painting some colors in. And so I'm going to add some blues, reds, and yellows just to make this look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to switch my brush over to the airbrush. I'm going to bring the strength way, way down, then change my color to blue. I'm just going to kind of layer some of that blue on my model. Now this actually might even be too strong, so I might bring the strength down a little bit more. Yeah, that should be better. Okay, and then I'll add some red in the middle here, have it bleed down into the blue a bit, add it to some of the ear as well. Okay, and with that in there, I'm going to add some yellow up top. Okay, with that added, there are a couple of spaces here I want to add some particular details, especially under the eye. So I'm going to switch this over to more of a purple color and just kind of brush this area up. Then I think the jaw is maybe a little too blue, so I might add some red to counterbalance it a bit. Okay, but ultimately that's looking pretty solid. I might add a little extra to the ears so they don't look too drained. Cool. The last thing I want to add some extra color to is a scar here. Typically scars don't retain the same color of the rest of the skin. You have parts of it that are a lot lighter. So I'm going to bring in my skin texture again and add it here, and then just brighten it up a tad to about here. And I'm just going to touch up the edges of my scar to have them stand out a little bit. Better. Cool. And just like that, we have pretty good coloring on our head. And again, something like this is something you could spend hours and hours on, just completely refining. But I like where this is at, and for my needs, this is looking just great. So now that we have the coloring on our head, I'd like to talk about what's called subsurface scattering real quick. So let's switch over to our render view and add a couple lights so we can see what's happening a bit better. Okay, so we have our model here. I'll actually turn these lights up a little bit higher. But if we look at our skin texture, the coloring's looking good, but it's looking really, really opaque. And that's because we don't have what's called subsurface scattering yet. Subsurface scattering is basically the setting that allows something to be translucent. And so with our skin, typically we have light rays hitting our skin, and then they go part way through, bounce around, and then come back out. That's why we can see that red light through our fingers or in someone's ear when light passes through them. And it's something we need to add to our skin if we want it to be realistic. So I'm going to come back to my shader editor. So if we come over to our subsurface setting right here, we can change the setting to random walk skin. And that's just how it calculates the light coming into the skin and going out of the skin. Now, if we bring the weight way up and just kind of exaggerate all of this real quick, bring the scale way up as well, we can see essentially what's happening. This is really translucent, almost as if there's nothing on the inside of my body. But essentially we see the light coming in, it bounces around and then comes back out. Now, on our bodies, it's very, very slight and subtle, but it's just enough to where when we don't have it at all, our skin looks really plasticky or waxy. So there are three main areas that are the most useful when using subsurface scattering. There's the weight, and that's basically the strength of your effect. There's the radius, and the radius is essentially the color of the light passing through. Each of these sliders are RGB. And then you have the scale, and the scale refers to how far the light actually gets through the mesh before it starts bouncing around and then coming back out. So if we bring the scale way low, and then the weight all the way up as well, you can see the effect's much less intense than it was when the scale was all the way up. So to use this, I'm going to bring the weight all the way up because we want the subsurface scattering to be in full effect, but we're going to play around mostly with the radius and the scale of our effect. As far as the radius goes, because the color of the light that's going to be passing through our skin is going to mirror the color of how we already textured our skin, we can just pull our base color right into the radius channel. And then under scale, I'm going to start by bringing that way up, again, just to kind of see what's happening. And you can see on these shallow parts of my body, they're looking really, really clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a hue saturation node, and I'm going to bring the saturation way up just so we exaggerate some of those red colors. Just play with these sliders until I get about the balance of red. And then once I essentially get what I want, I'm going to bring the scale down just so it's not a very dramatic effect. So I might bring it to 0.1. That way we have this really slight translucency to our skin, but it's not exaggerated in any sense. Cool. So we were able to bake our normal maps, add extra detail to our mesh. We're able to add that extra color onto the top of our base color, and we were able to add subsurface scattering to our model in order to give it a little bit of translucency. The last thing I want to go over is how to add a little bit more complexity on top of what we already have in order to make this guy look a little bit more believable. And how I'm going to show that is we're going to add some freckles to this guy. So if we take a look at our texture and pull some of these guys out of the way, basically we want to add freckles to the base color of our object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a mix node and put it in between my previous mix node and the base color. And then in this B slot here, I'm going to choose my freckle color. It's going to be this kind of dark brown color. And then in order to get the freckles to actually show up, I'm going to bring in a noise texture, and then I'm going to plug the factor into the factor of my mix node. Then if I bring the scale up, you'll see my freckles start to appear. Just to kind of exaggerate this, I might bring the darkness of my freckle down. And I might add like a color ramp in between here, just so I can sharpen those freckles up a little bit. And if you wanted freckles all over the face, you got it. But what I want to do is I want to restrict these freckles to kind of the forehead nose area of my model. So in order to do that, I'm going to pull the noise texture and the color ramp out a little bit more, and I'm going to add a mix color node in between the color ramp and this mix node here. And then I'm going to solo this mix node just so I can see what's happening. So what I need to do is I need to mask out these freckles everywhere except for this portion where I want them. So what I'm going to do in order to do that is I'm going to add another image texture, plug it into the factor of my mix node, and if I create a new image texture and call this Freckles, make sure my alpha is turned up, I'll click new image, and now we can go over to texture paint and paint out exactly where we want those freckles to be. So basically everywhere that's white is going to be where I'm going to have freckles. You can modify this guy after the fact, so I'm not too worried about getting anything wrong, anything in particular wrong. Just going to kind of paint with broad strokes and fix it later if I need to. So I'm going to stick here. So now if I come back to my layout panel and take a look at my texture, if I solo my mix node now, you can kind of see the effect of my mask. So I'm going to change this B color to black. So you can see not too much is happening, and what I actually need to do is I need to switch my noise texture to the B slot, and now you see this is exactly where I want my freckles to be. So now if I come back over to my principled BSDF, my freckles have appeared exactly where I wanted them to be. And if I wanted more control of where my freckles actually ended up, I could add like a mapping node, a map range node, plug it in here. And this would just kind of let me play around with the values a little bit more. So if I wanted to make them a little less obvious, I could bring down the min value. But it just allows me to add a little bit more detail and complexity to my skin texture. And there we have it. We have a pretty solid skin texture created just by baking our normal maps, adding strategic color all around our model and using subsurface scattering and then adding a couple of extra effects on top of that. I hope that helps you guys out. Excited to see what you come up with. Thanks guys. Talk to you later. Bye.